You know, in this latest episode of Badi Badi Baatein, our guest has said something very interesting, that all religions in the country, all religions in India are united by one thing, which is
hatred towards the queer community.
exactly 6 years of homosexuality being decriminalized in India. A conversation with Saurabh Kirpal, aka the man not allowed to be a judge because he is gay. Bizarre comment that came from the opposers.
377 was completely unnatural because the male body didn't produce enough lubrication.
They said it in the court.
He said it in court, yeah.
So, 6 years later, is queer India more audible? Hello.
If our constitution can have, in its Article 21, a right to an undisturbed sleep, you cannot say that there is no right to marry.
6 years later, is queer India more visible? It's like the entire community is invisible to the government.
When the marriage equality hearings were happening, none of the larger corporates came out and made any kind of a statement.
And 6 years later, is representation better?
We can't talk about Dostana, and there are. I suppose that sensitivity doesn't always come.
As big an icon as Mr. Kirpal can be discriminated against by the government. What does happen to other people who are not as privileged? Mr. Kirpal, welcome to the Quint and welcome to our show Badi Badi Baatein. September 6th. It's been 6 years now since Section 377 was struck down. And we have again seen a very long battle for same-sex marriage, but we'll come to that a little later. Do you remember how your day was?
Well, yes, actually. The evening before we'd found out that the judgment was coming, we all went and stood in the front row when the judgments were being pronounced. You know, when you're sitting at the front and you make eye contact with the judges, I know it's kind of a rarefied thing for everybody else, but when you are in that courtroom and you see that the judge and the judge sees you, it feels very personal. And it often is, because when they are writing their judgments, of course one is writing, I suppose, from a constitutional point of view, rights-based point of view, but there is also a human element, because here were these queer lawyers, Menika, Arundhati, me and a few others, standing in the front, and these judges looking at us, knowing they know us. We appear before them in court, we meet them outside court as well. And so there was kind of an emotional connect, I think, that happened when the judgment was being pronounced. And with each passing judgments, I think the lyricism of the judgments was so interesting. There was almost a poetry in each of them. So, I am who I am, take me as I am, is what Justice Dipak Misra said, going on to Justice Chandrachud's invocation of Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan. So it was as though, I repeat, they were speaking to us. And you could feel a little burden being lifted. The oppressive nature of its very existence. The fact that the court that we called our own had in 2013 and Kaushal's case thought it okay to call us a minuscule minority. That feeling that you considered second-class citizens, that kind of dissipated at that point of time. And I think when the last judgment was that of Justice Indu Malhotra, and she started by those famous lines that history owes an apology to the members of the queer community, it was just really the icing on the cake. It was also a win as a lawyer. I mean, so it was a personal win, it was a legal win, it was just such a happy day.
Do you particularly remember any bizarre comment that came from the opposers that you find funny?
My God, it's a long time ago. There were so many. The government, to its credit, didn't say very much because they had filed an affidavit saying that we have nothing to say, which is problematic in itself because the government ought to.
It's like the entire community is invisible to the government.
Correct, yeah. You do what you want to. Well, the courts sit in there to do what they want to in any case. They don't need your permission. They were all opposition by religious groups. The one thing that unites all religions in India is hatred towards the queer community. High Court, I can point out, there was the then ASG who had argued about how 377 was completely unnatural because of how the male body didn't produce enough lubrication. So there was obviously 377 had to be a crime. So these were the kind of arguments that had actually come and been actually canvassed in courts. And yes,
Said it in the court.
he said it in court, yeah. And the idea of 377 just being a sexual act, these were the arguments that were made by the ignoring the impact it has in the community. But so let's just leave it at that. As I said, the unity was of all religions.
Have you noticed any social change around you because of the verdict?
The social change is there for all to see. I don't think only people who haven't seen the social change are people like yourselves and younger, who probably did not know what India was in 2000, 2010. When I was growing up, I became an adult in 1990. I'm dating myself. There was no question of people coming out about their sexuality, let alone having a march. There are a few brave souls in Calcutta who did a march, a few other people here or there. In the last 6 years, queerness has moved from the fringes and being hidden to being almost mainstream. I see larger number of students coming out, even if not to their parents, because that is still a conservative society, which India is. That may take longer time, but at least to their other friends, to their colleagues, etc. So there's a sense of openness. I think the reason that we've come this far and what role this judgment has had to play particularly is because there's a sense in the community and I suppose the citizenry at large that the moral authority of the Supreme Court has been put behind the queer community, and the court has said it is an obligation of the state to protect it. It's not merely a case of don't ask, don't tell, but a positive affirmation on the state that you have to allow this, you have to allow conditions to exist which allow a life to flourish.
But then what many wonder is exactly about 5 years later, the court said, hey, you can't marry, you don't have the right to marry, you don't necessarily have the fundamental right to marry.
Yes.
Why didn't these arguments play up then?
They sort of did, but I think they were covered in a shroud of legalese and reverse justifications, if you ask me. But personally, of course, I believe the Constitution ought to recognize fundamental right to marry for the queer community. But the court went so far as to say that there is no fundamental right to marry even for any two straight citizens, straight people, let alone queer community. There is no right to marry under our Constitution. But in doing so, they ignored the practical reality, is that whereas religions do permit marriage, various statutes do permit marriage. And I think there was almost, with the greatest respect, a duplicity in the judgment of the court. So when you read each of the judgments, there are pages upon lamentations about how the queer community is treated so badly and how there is a right to a relationship that exists in our Constitution. Two people can be allowed to live together and they must have the rights of a relationship. But it felt short in directing the government to do something about it. Now, to me, that was a sense maybe of judicial reticence, but some more unkind than me would call it cowardice as well. In so many other matters, these arguments of institutional competence have been put to the wayside, and the courts have readily intervened, from declaring the right to a healthy environment to saying that you have a right to sleep also, undisturbed sleep. I mean, if our Constitution can have, in its Article 21, a right to an undisturbed sleep, then surely you cannot say that there is no right to marry. But that's what they said, and I hope it will change at some point.
Do you watch movies?
Rarely. I watch more YouTube clips and lectures on science, and I'm very boring that way. I watch a bit of Netflix, but...
Do you think there is a change in the kind of representation that the community gets in movies now? Because from the times of, say, My Brother Nikhil, or even a Dostana, which was touted to be India's Brokeback Mountain, but was far from it, do you see a better representation now?
Without doubt. I think mocking the queer community has become passé and unacceptable. A lot of it is led by economics, right? Earlier, mocking that effeminate gay man
get you the money and the laughs.
Would get laughs, get you money.
Yeah.
remember growing up and feeling more ashamed of myself when I saw these representations of these queer characters who are anything but positive. So that's changed. One is because of the money. So I think even filmmakers, a lot of whose assistants and who themselves may be queer people, we can't talk about dostana. I mean, there are, I suppose that sensitivity doesn't always come by your own sexuality, but people also mature, you know, we have to forgive people. I think sometimes we're too quick to judge. So people have matured, people have changed in the last 6 years after the judgment, but the person in rural India or a person in small town India, even if rural India will not see Netflix or other OTTs, but they will see some movies. The reach of Bollywood and fiction in that sense is so much greater. The transformative potential of telling stories is so great. You can't bring about social revolutions by merely marching onto the street. It is all about telling stories, engaging in the empathy of people, appealing to their better self. And I think that's what a responsibility of Bollywood now is.
Tokenism doesn't get you anywhere.
Tokenism doesn't get you anywhere, but you know what? I don't shy away from tokenism either. Tokenism is better than complete exclusion. Right?
You know, this is the argument comes every June. When everybody is going rainbow, all the big firms are like, you'll see your cab apps, your cab is rainbow, you suddenly have a lot of queer nights in places which usually do not have queer nights. So there is a lot of debate around whether this tokenism serves any purpose or whether these places, these big firms, these organizations, they actually propagate any kind of equality.
You know, I've in fact felt strongly about the fact that they don't do enough beyond Pride Month. When the marriage equality hearings were happening, none of the larger corporates, the multinationals who may support complete equality in their own countries came out and made any kind of a statement because it was perceived that it would be an unpopular move either socially or for the government. So yes, there's a lot to be said for corporates not standing up for queer rights, but that doesn't mean that I throw the baby out with the bathwater. While demanding more, I can't say don't do less. For a large number of queer people, it is a process of affirmation. They look forward maybe to that month in June when their stories will be highlighted. As long as it doesn't stop at that, that's the problem.
Yeah, it's been reported at length about what you went through with the government. It's been years of waiting since you've been snubbed of your judgeship. Some very vague reasons which are already known in the public domain about your partner not being an Indian national, about your sexuality may coming in the way of you deciding on those matters. But I have a very specific question when it comes to whatever happened with you. Certain amount of fear that arises that if somebody as big an icon as Mr. Kirpal, who is well educated, जो इंसान सारी दुनिया घूम घाम के आए हैं, अगर उनके साथ if that person can be discriminated against by the government, what does happen to other people who are not as privileged? So there begins the trust deficit with the government among the community. How do you look at it?
Well, look, it is undoubtedly a fact that I come from privilege, a fact that I have spoken of often in the past, a fact that cannot be denied. And I see your point that if someone with all the privilege such as myself can't smash through that glass ceiling, then who else can? But to which I'll simply answer that this is not the first time this is happening in terms of historical disadvantaged communities. There will always be people who will come first, who will try to make the change, who won't manage. And just because the barrier does not break down for the most privileged doesn't mean it will never break down. The drift of history is inevitable. This will go. Maybe because of me, you know, it's like I say, I'm trying to crack the glass ceiling, I'm only managed to burst my head. But in the process of doing so, maybe I've left some cracks in that ceiling, so the next person who tries to do it will get through.
Do you feel wronged with what has happened with you? Has your, have you gotten immune to it, or have you gotten too used to you being asked about it?
Well, I think one thing we must remember as lawyers is that we have fairly thick skins. Second, growing up gay in India is not easy for anybody. So anyone who's come out you learn to get a pretty thick skin, you know. Words matter, they always do, but you start dealing with it in a different way once you get that. I mean, I can't say inner peace, that's too Deepak Chopra, but you start to, you realize who you are.
Yeah.
So no one else's arguments are going to demean what I think of myself. It's sad for the community as a whole, for the country as a whole, that a person, maybe not me, a queer person could not be a judge, or that we still don't have a queer judge in the higher judiciary. I think it's sad, because we ought to have a representative judiciary. Karmanya badikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, they say, you know, right? So my name is out there. It's not for me to say what will happen, what will not happen. We shall see. I'm standing firm.
Mr. Kirpal, thank you so much for giving your time to the Quint and Quint Hindi, and thank you so much for joining me on Badi Badi Baatein.
Thank you very much. I hope it was not too long for the listener
Absolutely
to hear Badi Badi Baatein.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.